Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. Tonight we are doing the second in a very short mini-series of 3 classes, exploring Exile and Redemption, all in preparation for Pesach, which is coming soon. So last week we did an overview of all of history, and specifically Jewish history, as far as the dynamic of exile and redemption. We compared it to other dynamics that are very, very connected: run and return, ratzov v'shov, and the idea of contraction and expansion. And all of these are manifest in the world, in the psyche, in the spiritual worlds, the physical worlds in different ways. And that's what we explored last week. Where I want to start tonight is with, it's somewhat of a astounding concept. And it is somewhat unique to Judaism. And of course, Judaism has affected other religions and spiritual paths enormously. But that is what's called the exile of the Shechina. The concept that God is in exile. So when you hear this, and if one didn't know anything about it, it seems like a almost curious way to refer to God. God is the creator. God is running the universe. And yet we have this concept that God's presence, that we refer to as the Shechina. Many times it's referred to God's feminine presence in the world, is considered in exile. So the question is, first of all, what does that mean? And secondly, where do we see sources for this? Every idea or concept in Judaism is going to have its source somewhere in the Torah. So probably the main source is in the book of Bereshit, in Parashat Vayikra, towards the end of Bereshit, where Yosef has already revealed himself to his brothers. He tells them to go back and bring his father Yaakov down to Egypt because the famine is going to continue, and I will feed you, I will protect you, I will cause you to live. So Yaakov is on his way down to Egypt. This is still in the book of Genesis. And God comes to him in a dream. It's actually called a night vision, Mareh Halayla. And the verse says like this, for those who would like to follow, it's chapter 46, verse 2 in Genesis, 46:2. V'yomer Elokim liYisrael. God says to Israel. Now here Yaakov is being called Israel. And without going deeply into it, we see that Yaakov received a new name, Yisrael, but he's actually rarely called that. He's usually called Yaakov. And here we'll see the paradox in a second. So God calls to Yisrael, the Mareh Halayla, in a vision of the night, V'yomer Yaakov, Yaakov. And he calls Yaakov, Yaakov. So here we see in the same verse, he's referred to both of his names. And not only that, but this is, I believe that we've discussed this, this is one of only 4 times in the entire Tanakh that God calls to a person by their name twice. Yaakov, Yaakov. And if you look in a printed Chumash, you will not see this in the Torah itself, but there's an oral tradition, there's a black line between the two names of Yaakov, called a psik. And the other ones who are called by two names are Avraham, Yaakov, Shmuel, and Moshe. And the first three all have this black line, but Moshe has no line, no psik. This is a whole Torah in of itself. V'yomer hineni, and Yaakov says the typical answer for when God calls to a person is, I am here, hineni. I'm at your calling, hineni. Now this is the verse the next two verses. V'yomer anochi hakel elokei avicha. I am the God of your father. Al tira mirda Mitzrayim. Don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. Ki lagoy gadol asimcha sham. I will make you into a great nation there. Anochi ered imcha. Now this is really what we're getting to. This is God speaking. I will go down with you, Mitzrayim, to Egypt. Va'anochi elcha gam alo. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will. Now I'm going to translate it how most Chumashim will translate it. Anochi elcha gam aleh, meaning it's a double language of emphasis. And I will bring you up, and it's usually translated, I will surely bring you up. But if you look at the words quite literally, a better translation is, I will bring you up and also come up. And also come up. And that's the part I want to read to you. So most commentaries actually say, even though many times it's translated as I will surely bring you up, many commentaries say really the deeper meaning is I will bring you up and I will come up with you. I went down with you. I will come up with you. And this becomes the paradigm for God going into exile with the Jewish people, and when redemption comes, coming up with the Jewish people. And that's why in mystical texts, the Shechina and the totality of the Jewish people are almost synonymous. They're practically synonymous. It depends on the context in which you're speaking about it. But of course, the Shechina is God's presence. So this is the closest thing we have to a biblical source for this idea when God says, I will go down with you. If you're in exile, I'm in exile too. Now, where else do we see this? At the burning bush. So Rashi explains, why did God reveal himself to Moshe in a burning bush? And the bush was considered like a sticker bush, not a kingly bush, not a kingly tree, a lowly bramble bush. And Rashi says, based on oral sources, that God says, if you are in pain, meaning the Jewish people, if the Jewish people are in pain and exile, I am also in pain and exile. This is from Rashi. Another example from the sages, in one of the Psalms, it says, Oz v'chedva b'makomo. Strength and joy is in his place meaning God's place. Strength and joy. So in the Gemara, there's a discussion about the destruction of the temple. And one of the sages said that God cries over the destruction of the temple every day. And one of the other sages say, how can you say that? We have a verse that strength and joy are in his place. How can you say that there's crying in God's place? So the sage answers a profound statement where he says, in God's outer, call it courtyards, God's outer face to the world, there is strength and joy. In God's inner chamber, there is crying. So this is a very, very, very deep thing. This idea that we have what's called chitzoniut and pnimiut. There's, and I have to say, I relate this very, very much to Reb Shlomo. To the outside world, he was the master of joy. He was bringing joy to so many people. And like that was how he appeared to people. But the more you got to know Reb Shlomo on like a close relationship, the more you understood how broken he was inside. And this is true of a lot of people, by the way. And a lot of tzaddikim, they're there to give us strength and hope and joy and optimism. But they're carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. And so in their inner chamber, there's this idea that they are crying. So this we apply to God as well. And we can understand this through a tremendous paradox that I think about all the time. I have to assume many people think about this. On one hand, we are encouraged, and we have many, many expressions that everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be. That God is running the world, and when we look at the world, everything is the way it maybe not should be, but the way it is. And there are different times where it's easy to accept that. For example, on Shabbat, where we're somewhat aware that there's an outside world out there. But on Shabbat, it's such a spiritual bubble, which is such a positive thing. We have one foot in the world to come. We're in a different dimension altogether. And so many times it's very easy to experience the world as it's perfect. It's like everything is exactly the way it needs to be, should be. On the other hand, when we look at the world, it's very hard to believe that this is what God wants from the world that he created. This is the best we can do. What happened to Tikkun Olam? What happened to the idea of our needing to fix the world? So I'm just pointing out this very deep paradox that on one, and they're both true simultaneously. Everything is exactly the way it is and needs to be for reasons that only God knows. On the other hand, there's no way that this is the way the world should be. We need to fix the world. We need God's help to fix the world. And we live with this existential paradox. So it's the same thing as it were with God. That God gave us free choice. And once God gives us free choice and agrees to play by the ground rules, well, it's not hard to understand that the world isn't exactly the way it could or should be, because God has given over so much of the running of the world. We say in Hallel, Hashemayim Shemayim Lashem Va'aretz Natan Livnei Adam. The heavens are the heavens of God, and the earth he's given over to people. So this falls into a different aspect of God's being in exile, the idea of God being a hidden God. And the verse, and I believe that we discussed this just a few weeks ago in relationship to Purim, where one of the most important verses about Purim is Achein Ata Kel Mistater Elokei Yisrael Umimena Yoshia. You are a hidden God, the God of Israel, and from our sorrows we will be saved. One second. No, I got two verses mixed up. I'm going back. Achein ata kel mistater Elokei Yisrael Moshiach. You are a hidden God, the God of Israel, the one who saves. It's a different verse, and it's about Sar, that from the challenge and the pain and the sorrow comes the salvation. Umimena Yoshia. That's a different verse, but obviously it's connected. So what's this thing that God is a hidden God? Achein ata kel mistater. You're a hidden God. So the two reasons given over are that if God would fully reveal himself, very similar to what happened at Mount Sinai, where God did for a short time pull away the curtain, pull away the almost the wall of iron separating us from God. And what happened? People's souls left their bodies. In other words, the revelation of God in its fullness is in a way too much for human beings to deal with. That's why God says, no one can see my face and live. It's not like a threat. It's just, that's the reality. God, like, if we understood even for a second, even the power in one atom, how do they make atomic bombs? They just take the power, the energy that's in the atom. Well, you can't even see the atom. Can you imagine God's power, God's energy, if he fully revealed himself? So God has to be hidden. But before there was a creation, God wasn't hidden. So this is God's exile, as it were. In order for there to be a world, God has to, in a sense, exile his ability to be fully revealed. And the second answer is so that there would be free will. Because if God was fully revealed, we would not be able to do anything wrong. It wouldn't work. We would just do the right thing. We would be in tune with God's will. And since God wants us to earn the merit of being an image of God, we have to earn it. We have to live it. We have to merit it. So if God fully revealed himself, we wouldn't have that choice. It would just be like a parent who is afraid to let go of their child's hand when it's trying to learn to walk. And will grasp that hand until the child is in their 60s or 70s and can't let go. Well, God let go, but God's letting go is symbolic on a very deep, primordial way of God's source of being in exile. Now, Rav Ginsburg teaches a beautiful thing about compassion. He says there are three, one isn't a person, but there are three entities towards which we should have compassion. First, we should have compassion for every human being that comes into this world, because it is a traumatic experience for the soul, and in a soul that is from the upper spiritual worlds to come into a blemished physical material world. So we should have compassion on every human being. Second, we should have compassion on every Jew because of our history, because of everything that we've gone through. Every Jew deserves compassion. And Rav Ginsburg says, surprisingly, the third is we should have compassion on God. Because, as I said before, can we imagine what God thinks of the world that he created and what he would want for us, and God's vision of a perfect world? And then God looks at what we're doing with it. God is worthy of our compassion. So now I just want to mention this coming week is Parshat Vayikra. We're beginning a new book of Leviticus, and it's named after the first word, Vayikra, El Moshe. God calls to Moshe to come into the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and to begin the service of God in the Mishkan. In the word Vayikra is a small aleph. Actually, for those who were here on Sunday, our Fruits of the Orchard class, we did go over this, but it's worth going over again because here it's in this very context of exile and redemption. So in the word Vayikra is a small aleph called an aleph ze'ira, small aleph. Anytime you have a small or big letter, it's telling us that there are tremendous secrets here. You have to look very deeply. Why would this letter be small? The usual explanation is it represents Moshe's humbleness. Moshe is called the most humble person on the face of the earth. And he felt almost embarrassed that God was calling him in a language of endearment. Rashi says that the word Vayikra is a terminology of endearment. And so he didn't want to even put the aleph. And God says, you have to put the aleph, because when I talk to Bilam, I'm going to say Vayikar. I just happened to come upon Bilam. He doesn't deserve this language of endearment. So the Midrash says they came to a compromise. Moshe wrote the letter Aleph, but he made it small. But for our purposes, there's a very deep and profound understanding of the small Aleph, that it really is representing God's humbleness. Here is, and Moshe in the Midrash asked God, when God first tells Moshe to build a Mishkan, Moshe says, the whole world can't contain you. How is this little place that you're telling us to build, and you're telling us you're going to come and dwell in this small, tiny place? Like Moshe was like, how does that work? And so this is really what we're saying. This is the secret of tzimtzum, of contraction, that God contracted his infinite being in order for there to be a world. This, of course, is the whole teaching of the Arizal on tzimtzum. So this little aleph that God is calling Moshe into the tabernacle, really the small aleph, in a sense, is the mirror image of Moshe's humbleness, is God's humbleness in allowing there to be a world in the first place and allowing human beings to have free will in order that the earth should be given over into their hands. So this small aleph represents God's humbleness, God's contraction, but here also God's exile. That God has exiled his revelation from the world in an open way. In a hidden way, of course, God is running the world. The name Elohim equals Hateva, equals nature. And so God is running the world through nature. But so much of what happens in this world, a lot of it which we tend to blame on God, is simply a consequence of our own actions. So I want to end this first introductory idea of the exile of the Shechina, that we're told in different ways, in very inspirational ways. Many of them are allegoric, metaphoric, symbolic language from the prophets of Israel of what will happen in the Messianic era. And all of them share one idea, that in the Messianic era, God's presence and the wisdom of God will be far more revealed than we can even imagine today. All the prophets said the same thing. Each one said it in their own special way. I'm going to say it now, but we'll end the class with the same idea. One of the most well-known is from Isaiah, and the Rambam ends his classic work, the Mishnah Torah, with this verse from Isaiah. The last two chapters of the Mishnah Torah from Rambam are about Mashiach. And in the end, he explains who the Mashiach will be, different traditions, what the Mashiach has to accomplish to be considered the Mashiach, and then ends with this very beautiful vision of peace and harmony and cooperation in the world and God's revelation. And he ends by saying that the knowledge of God will cover the earth like the waters cover the seas. The last part is Kamayim Layam Mechasim. Deya Hashem. Okay, it just escapes me right now. But like the waters cover the sea, the whole earth will be full of the knowledge of God. And of course, it will only happen if God reveals it to us and opens up our minds and consciousness in the final redemption. Now, I want to move to personal exile and redemption. I believe we mentioned already this statement from Rav Ginsburg. Good. Dara just put it. Umalah ha'oretz deya et Hashem kamayim liyam mechasim. Thank you, Dara. Umalah et ha'oretz deya Hashem kamayim liyam mechasim. I believe last week we already brought this statement from Rav Ginsburg, simple but important, critical idea is he asked, what does exile mean in relationship to a human being? How do we experience exile? And what does it mean redemption for an individual. So he said, and I remember when I heard this, for me, it was life-changing. It's absolutely life-changing. Just one sentence. He said, exile on a personal level means the inability to express oneself. And redemption on a personal level means the ability to express oneself. And I believe we went over this last week, but just in case someone wasn't here, meaning that when we can't express ourselves, we're frustrated, we feel lost, we feel bottled up. Sometimes we get angry, we take it out on other people. And it's all because we're not able to express ourselves, either in our talents or in relationships. And everything is bottled up inside. That's what's called exile. And redemption is the ability on all these different levels to express ourselves fully without fear. So that's just such an important idea. But I'm bringing it again for a very important reason, because tomorrow night begins Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Rosh Chodesh Nisan is one of the most important days in the whole year. It doesn't get the publicity and the recognition that it needs. But very simply, Rosh Chodesh Nisan is the new year of months. Our whole calendar is based on the idea that Chodesh Nisan is the first of the months. We have a new year of months and a new year of years. Rosh Hashanah in the 7th month is the new year of years. But our calendar is really based on a lunar calendar, and it begins on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. That is the first of the months. That was the first mitzvah the Jewish people received in preparation from coming out of Egypt. That this, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, Rosh Chodeshim, Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chodshei Hashanah. This is the first of the months to you. And the word Chodesh, of course, comes from the word Chadash, new. So this is very much the energy of Pesach. It's redemptive energy, the whole month. We've been talking a lot about exile, but the whole month of Nisan is about redemption. On a historical level, the whole story of our slavery and freedom from Egypt, but it goes so much deeper. Every year, this new redemptive energy returns in a new cycle. And it's for us to plug into it. It's in the air. It's what's called living with the times. What's happening now is newness is coming into the world. So every month has a letter associated with it, and every month has a sense called in Hebrew chush, and every month has a tribe that is related to it. And there are many, many more associations, a planet, a part of the body, many, many more associations, a permutation of God's name. We're not going to go through all of that tonight, but the three that we're going to go through are the letter of the month is the letter Hey. This comes from Sefer Yetzirah. And the sense of the month, the talent, the chush, the potential of the month is speech. And the tribe of the month is Yehuda, Judah. So I'm going to apply this all to the idea of expression, because that is our definition of personal redemption. And so therefore, at this time of year, and I'm going to say it now, and maybe say it again next week, is the most important thing of Pesach is for each person to plot their way out of their own personal Egypt and to embrace freedom. In other words, to prepare our houses for a whole month, all of the shopping and the cleaning and everything that goes with preparing for Pesach. And then the Seder, and in Chutz La'aretz, 2 Seders. And if we do all of that, and at the end we feel just as frustrated, just as in personal exile as before, then we've accomplished nothing. Don't get me wrong, it's very important to connect to our history, to connect to our people in the whole story of coming out of Egypt. Seder night is like electric. It's there's nothing else like it. But again, if we come out of the Seder, but we haven't worked on getting out of our own Egypts, and we all have our Egypts, we all have our self-imposed jails, our self-imposed exiles. If we don't take this time of year to take the whole story of coming out of Egypt and make it very personal, that's what we say in the Haggadah, Chayav Adam Lirot et Atzmo Ki'ilu Hu Yatsa Mimitzrayim. Every person is obligated to see themselves as if they came out of Egypt. So in Chassidut, it says, don't read it as if. Read it, you were there. This is your story. And in the secret of Gilgul, of reincarnation, we take that quite literally. We were there. Every Jew who would ever be born was there, because we're all recycled souls. We were there. But it means more than that. It means don't experience the Seder as if you're talking about someone else a long time ago. What about you? How are you going to get out of your Egypt? Tonight's the night. We're going tonight. So this is the work that we're already involved, but it bumps up a level on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Tomorrow night is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So the letter Hey is a letter of expression. Why? Because the mouth, physiologically, sound and words and letters come out of the mouth from 5 places in the mouth, and Hey equals 5. And just for example, if you want to express yourself by getting someone's attention, a classic way is, hey, hey over there, hey, I'm talking to you. And here we just saw what we read. When God calls to Yaakov, he answers, Hineni. Hineni begins with a hey. In other words, this idea is, I'm here. I'm listening. So either way, if we're trying to get someone's expression or someone is acknowledging, I'm listening to you, it's with the letter Hey. And as you can see behind me, there's 2 letter Heys right here. These are the 2 Heys of God's name. And they're in God's name because the name Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, this is the vehicle through which God expresses himself in creation as creator. And the main letter here are the 2 Heys. This is how it's being expressed and manifest in our world. Now, this is connected, of course, with the chush of the month. The sense of the month is speech. And what is the name of the text that we will be reading at the Seder? The Haggadah. What does Haggadah mean? It means to tell the story. And it's one of the 613 mitzvot in the Torah, is to tell the story of coming out of Egypt on Pesach night. Not the night before and not the night after, even though that is also a mitzvah, and that's why it's included in the prayers in the morning and the evening, the remembrance of going out of Egypt. Because we're told we have to remember every day coming out of Egypt. But specifically on Seder night. So, and the whole month revolves around Pesach. And the Arizal said, when you read the word Pesach, divide between the two syllables and read it Pe dash Sach. Sach means to converse. Pe means with your mouth. So that's what he said. What is Pesach? The mouth is speaking. The mouth is expressing itself. And here, because we have an obligation to tell the story to our children. And we're told that, well, let's say you don't have children, or your children are grown up and they're not at your Seder. And there's no other children, there's no other people. During COVID, many people had Seder by themselves or just with their spouse, which was a very different experience. But we're told, well, who's going to ask the 4 questions? Who are you telling the story to? Well, the answer is obviously to yourself. We also have to hear the story. Obviously, the idea is to give it over to our children. The children are such an important part of how the sages constructed the Haggadah, the 15 steps of the Haggadah. They all had the children in mind, but in a certain way, we all have a child within us, and we all have to hear the story. So many times in the Torah, it says that God spoke to Moshe, peh el peh, mouth to mouth. Now, how do we spell peh? Peh, hey. Both of those letters have to do with the mouth and expression. The peh is the physical mouth, and the hey is the V letter of expression. So Rav Ginsburg says, so what does it mean? Peh el peh. Now I'm saying this because Rosh Chodesh Nisan is exactly between Purim and Pesach. So Rav Ginsburg said a beautiful thing. Up to now, for 1.5 classes, we've been talking about the dynamic of exile and redemption. So there's a big question. Every 19 years, in order to keep the moon, meaning the lunar calendar, in sync with the solar calendar, we add 7 leap years. Therefore, we have 2 months of Adar in those 7 years. When we have a leap year, we have 7 leap years. So the question is, in Adar, which one is the regular Adar and which one is the additional Adar? So you have 2 Adars. So in a way, we would think that the first Adar should be the regular Adar, and the second Adar is the added one. And there's certainly a logic to it. The only problem is that there is a tradition from the time of Purim that we have to connect Geula to Geula, redemption to redemption. the redemption of Purim to the redemption of Pesach. So if we would make Purim in the first Adar, then there'd be a second Adar that would be kind of interrupting the flow of redemption to redemption. So Rav Ginsburg says, what letter begins the word Purim? Peh. What letter starts the word Pesach? Peh. So he said, Peh el Peh means also from Purim to Pesach. Now, both of these months are really connected to Moshe Rabbeinu. The whole reason that Haman chose to try genocide on the Jewish people in the month of Adar, because he went through the whole year, and there was always like something good happening to the Jewish people. So he said, okay, that's not the right energy here. He gets to the month of Adar and he looks, Moshe Rabbeinu died in Adar. Their great leader dies. Ah, what a great time for my plan. What didn't he remember? That Moshe was also born on Zayin Adar. So he not only died, but he's born on Zayin Adar. And according to the Zohar, and according to Chassidut, Moshe is reborn spiritually every Zayin Adar. And actually, when they give over the idea of these two dates being the same for his birth and the death, first they put the death. He died on Zayin Adar and he was born. Well, you would think they'd say he was born and then he died. But the reason is the Zohar teaches that the energy and actually the actual being of Moshe is in every generation. And as we've learned, the Alter Rebbe says that there's a spark of Moshe in every person. I think we just learned this on Sunday for those who were there. There's a spark of Moshe in every person. So Peh el Peh is from Purim to Peh. And of course, Moshe led us out of Egypt. So he's intrinsically connected to the redemption of Purim and the redemption of Pesach. And one idea that we should add, it says in the Gemara, Mordechai bedoro kim Moshe bedoro. Mordechai in his generation was like Moshe in his generation. And there's the idea that Moshe, as he incarnates into the leaders of each generation, he is Mordechai. So Moshe is part of the Purim redemption, and he's part of the Pesach redemption. Peh el Peh. But Rav Ginsburg adds another just beautiful thing. Mouth to mouth. So what's the word for to? Mouth to mouth is El. El is Gematria 31. Pesach is exactly 31 days after Purim. Exactly 31 days after. So Peh el Peh. But the idea here is the redemption of Purim is similar to the redemption of Pesach in one way. We read the Megillah. The whole idea is we read the story, not once, twice. We read the story. And then 31 days later, again, now we tell the story of coming out of Egypt, this idea of expression. And of course, in Hebrew, the term for the oral Torah is Torah shel Baal Peh, is the Torah of the master of the mouth. The oral Torah means that we have the ability to give it over, to express it to someone else, and especially the next generation. And of course, the Haggadah begins with a hey. It's not only that it's telling the story, but it begins with a hey. And in the Haggadah, there are 15 steps to the Haggadah. The fifth step, remember hey equals 5, is called Magid. Magid is by far the longest section of the entire Haggadah, because that's the part of the Haggadah where we actually go through the whole story. Many of the parts of the Haggadah are simply saying Kiddush, washing our hands, dipping a vegetable, breaking a matzah. All of those happen fairly quickly. But Magid is when we tell the whole story, and it's the fifth part. And how does it begin? Ha lachma anya. Ha is spelled the same way the letter hey is sometimes spelled. Hey lachma anya. Hey everyone, don't fall asleep after the first cup. We got a long way to go. Everyone wake up. Okay, now I just want to add the connection, because we mentioned that the tribe of the month, according to the Arizal, is Yehuda. Now this makes so much sense because I mentioned before that Rosh Chodesh Nisan is the new year of months, but it's also a new year of something else. It's the new year of Jewish kings. That Jewish kings would mark the years of their rule starting with Rosh Chodesh Nisan, whereas kings of other nations begin from what we call Rosh Hashanah. So it's a new year of kings. So which tribe produces the kings? Yehuda. Yehuda. And there's a verse that says, Ba'asher devar hamelech shilton, that the word of the king is authority. In other words, a king in usual understanding doesn't actually do anything. He just gives the orders. And he gives the orders through speech. That's what it says. Devar melech shilton. The word of the king is his authority. And then it is, even like in the Megillah, the king said something, they wrote it up and put the stamp of the king, but it all came from his speech. So this tells us also the power of speech, the power of expression. And again, we want to relate this to each and every one of us, is this idea of expressing ourselves. So there are many, many different jails that we can put ourselves in. Many, many different Egypts. Egypt, of course, comes from the word tsar, meitzar, narrow places. And we all have a tendency to put ourselves, and sometimes to see the world like what are called horse blinders, like this. We make narrow vision. And the month of Nisan is the time to break through those borders, to break through those constrictions. So I want to end with one last idea, and that is that 4.5 books of the Chumash are bound up with going down to Egypt and coming out of Egypt. It begins with the sale of Yosef in, we'll call it like halfway through the book of Genesis. And then the brothers go down, Yaakov goes down. And of course, the whole rest of the Torah is dealing with the slavery in Egypt, which is actually just really 4 parshas. And the rest is the 40 years in the desert on our way to the Holy Land. So really, most of the Torah is based around the paradigm of exile and redemption. And we're told one of the most important ways to understand this on a personal level is to understand that going down to Egypt, when translated in personal terms, means the soul coming down to the body. The soul is in a heavenly, pristine, spiritual, godly ambiance, world. And coming down to Egypt, coming down to the body is like coming down to Egypt. In relationship to the spiritual worlds, the body in this physical material world is Mitzrayim. It narrows our focus tremendously. And the whole story of coming out of Egypt and attaining freedom, receiving the Torah and Sinai, and then going to Eretz Yisrael is the journey of the soul in this world, in the body, in this physical world. And when we come to the Holy Land, in a certain way, this is when the soul is ready to leave the body and to return to its Holy Land. So this is a very, very important paradigm to understand, that the whole story of Egypt and freedom and exile, it's our personal stories. We have to learn to translate it into our own lives and to do the hard work to learn how to express ourselves. To express ourselves to God through prayer, to express ourselves to other people, to take our talents and our potential and to be able to bring it into the world in a fulfilling way. This is what the stuff of life is about. So I want to bless everyone that it's time to go free. There's one. I actually wrote a song to this. One of my favorite verses. It's not in Nusach Ashkenaz, but it's in Nusach Sfard and Sfardi and Nusach Ari. And we say a psalm that ends by saying, Nafshenu k'tzipor nimlata mipach yochshim. Hapach nishbar v'nachnu nimlatnu. Ezreinu b'shem Hashem oseh shemayim v'aretz. My soul is like a bird that has escaped from the cage. Let me go over the Hebrew again. Oh yeah, the cage, the doors of the cage are broken, and we have gone free with the help of God, the creator of heaven and earth. I say that every day, and I just love that. Like I said, I wrote a whole song to that because I need to say that every day, because I need to remind myself every day of not getting caught in all of the narrow places of this world. It's so easy to get shut down or shut ourselves down. It's not even that other people are shutting us down. We know very well how to shut ourselves down. We have to learn the opposite. We have to learn to be like a bird escaping from the cage. So I bless all of us that we we are able to reach that level this coming Pesach.